Welcome to Keep What You Earn, your judgment and jargon-free zone for entrepreneurs of all levels. Get ready to learn how to scale your business, save money in taxes, and create a business that grows your wealth. If it feels like the financial side of business is like eating your vegetables, well, then think of this podcast as the ranch dressing to make the process a little more enjoyable. My name is Shannon Weinstein. I'm a CPA and business owner on a mission to simplify money and empower others through knowledge. I hope this episode inspires you to take action, but remember that the information we share is for educational purposes only and is not individual tax advice. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start the show. There are so many interesting specialties in accounting and taxes and really never-ending niches that you can be in. And when I heard this guest particular niche, I was really interested in having him on the show because he has such a great specialty in the area of gambling. So if you are a recreational or professional gambler, or even if you just do a few wagers here and there, participate in fantasy football, or you hit the casino every now and then, this episode is for you. So today we're going to be talking with Zak Zimbile. Zak is a certified public accountant and the owner of a remote CPA firm specializing in gambling tax. He's worked with recreational and professional poker players, sports bettors, and advantage players for more than 10 years. Although based in Las Vegas, he's helped clients in nearly every single state navigate the world of gambling taxation. Definitely check out his links in the show notes for more information on how you can get in touch with him. And if you do have any questions about the show, don't forget to hop into the community. We would love to have you in there and ask more questions around this episode and anything else you learn on the show. With that, let's hear from Zak. Hey, Zak, welcome to the show.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Say hello to everyone and tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so my name is Zak Zimbile. I am a CPA. And I focus on the world of gambling tax. I mean, we have clients that run, all types of income types, but we primarily focus on recreational and professional gamblers.
Awesome. And now let's clarify, when you say like recreational and professional gamblers, like what are they doing? Like what makes someone a recreational versus professional gambler by definition?
So the definition, there is no tried and true definition of recreational versus professional gambler. In general, most people are going to fall into the recreational bucket. It's just people who have one-off sports betting wagers, or they go to the casino a couple of times a year, and they're getting enjoyment out of playing, and they're doing it on a recreational basis, hence the name.
Got it.
If you're pursuing it in more of a business sense, the IRS lays out 7 guidelines of what defines a hobby versus a business, and there's a little bit more nuance behind it because you're really going to have to be treating it as a business and following those 7 procedures in order to potentially be considered a professional gambler and self-employed.
Yeah. And most people assume that like gambling is associated with like just going to the casino. It's like, well, I never win when I go to the casino, so I don't really have any gambling winnings. But there's a much more broad definition of what gambling actually is, or gambling income actually is. We were just talking about a little bit before we hit record. Could you help shed some light on examples of things that are technically gambling or, that you may not be thinking about?
Yeah, the IRS definition of gambling is pretty broad. It's basically money earned from placing a wager on a game of chance. So it's a 3-pronged definition. So that can range from anything you find in the casino, table games, slots, keno, sports betting, bingo, any type of poker. It would also apply to online gambling, which usually has the same game offerings. But then it extends to horse or dog racing, daily fantasy sports. That's a big one because for legal purposes, daily fantasy sports is considered a game of skill. Whereas for IRS purposes, although it's up for debate, pretty clearly gambling activity. And then outside of regulated things, you have lotteries, you could have a raffle, potentially a sweepstake if you're purchasing, and then peer-to-peer wagers with a friend or home games. And now I understand the stigma behind reporting things like a home poker game, but according to the IRS, you should be reporting that income.
And what if the prize for these things isn't monetary? Is that still considered income?
It is. So it depends on what type of prize you're getting. But let's just say you are in a casino and you generated enough playthrough to be entered into a sweepstakes. You're not actually paying money for that. And let's just say you win a car. Instead of receiving a gambling form, a W-2G, they'll just give you a 1099 miscellaneous that says, hey, look, the value of this car was $25,000, and you'll still have to pay tax on the value of the car.
Oh, wow. So then, I mean, there's really no hiding anything that you win from the IRS in a sense.
No, even if it's not reported, you still need to be reporting it. But a lot of the times, casinos will be reporting any of those larger wins already on your behalf.
Okay. And I have a question for you too. How did you get into this specialty? Like what provoked a curiosity here, or how did you gain so much experience in this specific area and specialty?
Yeah. So growing up, I always just had a general interest in gambling. In the early or mid 2000s, online poker was going on. So I was kind of in that age range where it was something I liked to be doing. Then after college, I moved to Las Vegas and began working with recreational and professional gamblers, just the nature of the geographic location.
Mm-hmm.
So I was working at a firm, and we quickly realized that many players and tax professionals alike, both, were pretty unfamiliar with the nuances of gambling, and there's kind of a need to fill the niche. So we went ahead and we kind of expanded and worked with more players, and then I started just learning more about the tax code as it becomes specifically to gambling, and I realized that most of the time the answer when it comes to gambling is it depends. There's not many tried and true regulations and guidelines where it's absolutely going to be one thing or another. So it had to kind of require us to get a nice interpretation of the code. And it also became clear that the tax code is inherently unfavorable to gamblers. So we wanted to, it was kind of my goal to get in front of it and help players the best they can minimize their tax obligations, since, no pun intended, the deck was already stacked against them as it comes to taxes.
Wow. And and now you're on your own right now, right? You're running your own firm specializing in gambling and the tax implications associated with it.
Yeah. So fast forward to today, I'm a CPA, and I've worked with poker players, advantage players, sports bettors, video poker players, gambling syndicates, all their tax professionals, you name it. I've kind of worked with everyone in the field. And now with legalized sports betting and iGaming growing throughout the US, expected to have probably 4 or 5 more states come online this year. There's just tons of bettors that aren't as familiar with the potential tax ramifications of their gambling activity. Really. So I just want to educate people ahead of time so they know what the implications are if they're going to go ahead and do any sort of gambling, and help them get their records in order or their expectations in line so they can be more aware of what's going to happen come the end of the year and if they're going to potentially owe more money because of what they're doing.
And what would you say are some of the best tips to keep track of all this stuff? Because I imagine if somebody's, especially, we'll say whether recreational or professional, if they are, in Vegas visiting the casino every weekend, or even if they're not, and they just have a lot of different activities going on during the year, it must be really hard to keep track of these things. Like, how often you go and you're recording wins, losses, and so on. What are your tips for people to track all this activity for tax time?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. Even I don't frequent as much anymore, but even when I do, I think about kind of the hassle it is to track it. But when it comes to professionals or recreationals alike, it's pretty much the same. You're going to want to keep the same information. You can do it in any format you want. You could have an app in your phone. You can use the notes in your phone. You can handwrite it. You can put it in an Excel spreadsheet. But ideally, you're going to want to track your sessions while you're gambling. So that's one thing there's kind of a little bit of, again, interpretation with the IRS, because depending on the game that you're playing, your definition of session is going to be different. So if you're playing slot machines, you can take all of your slot machine activity from a 24-hour period, and you can take the net result. So that's important, because if you're going to have a ton of coin in or potential jackpots throughout the day that may total $10,000, if at the end of the day you lost 1,000, you only have to report in your session $1,000 loss, which saves you on your tax return. If you're playing in a poker tournament, that's a little bit more easy to understand. One poker tournament is one session. If you're playing, let's just say, a cash game for poker, any same stake, same type of game. So if you're playing no limit hold'em all day, you can take the net result from your session. So it's really important to track your sessions, because it will, at the end of the day, reduce your adjusted gross income, which for those people who are not itemizing their deductions, it's really going to help them come tax time.
Now, I have a friend who I knew when I was in my 20s, and he would religiously go buy lottery tickets and save all of them and save every lottery ticket he ever bought and go, I'm going to deduct these on my taxes. Can you just clarify how you deduct these losing lottery tickets if you do?
Yeah. The hardest part, if you're ever going to be in some sort of auditor where you have to prove your losses to an agent, is proving cash transactions. So whether it's losing lottery tickets or losing sports betting tickets, whatever it is, you always hear, hey, I can go to the casino, I can go to the track, I can collect these losing tickets, present them to an agent, and it's over. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. You have to prove that you actually purchased these tickets. So I could show up with $5,000 worth of losing sports betting tickets, but the agent's going to want to say, well, prove to me that you paid for these. So the key thing to do is to have a logbook or whatever you're using to track all of your gambling sessions and have a way to corroborate it. So if you have a $500 loss on February 10th, you can say, hey, look, I have a withdrawal from an ATM for $700, and the following day I put $200 in. So it gives you a little bit more time of, hey, here's the $500 loss. Or while you're gambling, swipe your card and you can say, hey, look, the card, it might not be tracking exactly my wins and losses, but it puts me in the casino on February 10th. So you really just need to, as much as you can, bolster your records. That way the agent who's looking at them can rely on them more than simply just saying, it looks like this person on December 31st or, a year later went back and retroactively made up some numbers to hopefully substantiate their position.
Yeah, it's about more than just having this is evidence that I did this, but it could be somebody else's tickets, could just be passing that around your family and claiming deductions. You never know. The IRS is always going to be a little skeptical.
Right. Yeah. And it always depends on the agent. But like I said,
right.
If you can present them with comprehensive session records or comprehensive logbook that shows you took this seriously, you have everything tracked, you can point to outside references that legitimize everything, you're going to have a lot easier time. And the agent's probably going to not believe you, but give credibility to what you're presenting to them.
I genuinely do not know this, but is there a resource out there, like a tool? I think of tools like Receipt Bank and QuickBooks and other things where I go, is there a gambler's version of a quick app to track your sessions or anything that would be acceptable as evidence?
You can use whatever you want. So what happened, a lot of the apps that are out there are more geared towards poker, but there are some general gambling tracking apps out there. But what'll happen with any app that you use, they'll have an export to Excel function and it'll just export it for you. So if you want to use your phone and, kind of have use the app and then know at the back end, it'll export it. That's great. But you could also just go straight to Excel at the end of the day and do it. The one issue that I seem to see from couple of my clients is their phone will get erased throughout the year or something will happen and all of their app data is gone. So if you're going to use an app, you're going to want to back it up frequently. That way you can say, hey, look, one, I was keeping all of these records contemporaneously because you can see I have Excel spreadsheets from every month. And then two, just make sure that you have a backup somewhere at the very worst case scenario in case your phone decides to go out on you.
Yeah, that's generally good advice, guys. Have a backup of everything and keep contemporaneous records. Yeah. What are some of the nuances, Zach, to the state tax implications and how that can vary from state to state?
Yeah, it's definitely more important now that online gambling has become legalized all over the place, but it can range from, you don't have to worry about it. States like Nevada, there's no state tax, so you don't have to worry about gambling winnings or losses at all. You have other states that will only tax you on your net gambling winnings and losses. So if you go to New Jersey, it doesn't matter how much you win and how much you lose. They only want to see your net result for the year, which is very nice. A majority of the states will follow the federal statute. So they're still going to want to see your gross winnings. And then you'll take either your federal gross itemized deductions or the state level itemized deductions, and they'll break it down that way. That, for the most part, is not that disadvantageous, but you have a couple states where, New York, for instance, if you have a high adjusted gross income, you can potentially lose all of your itemized deductions. So depending on where you live, could be an issue. And then you have states that completely disadvantageous to gamblers. So you have a state like Ohio or North Carolina. No matter what happens, you cannot deduct your gambling losses. The only thing you can do is show your gross gambling winnings, and they will assess their state tax either at a flat rate or the graduated marginal rates, which makes it really tough to win in those states because if you're gambling, your edge is probably quite small in general. And then on top of that, you have to add anywhere from a 3 to 8% state tax on your gross figure, which could completely eliminate anything you've done positively for the year.
Wow. Yeah, that is a lot to consider there. Um, what are some of your tips for someone who's looking to get into and expand their, well, it's like gambling presence in a sense, like they want to maybe take this professional. What are some pieces of advice you give them just to set the right expectations?
Yeah, if you're going to pursue this at a professional level, first thing I would do is just make sure you're qualifying to file as a professional. Uh, I work with some clients who have, W-2 day jobs, doctors, lawyers, whatever field that they're in, but they also put in enough time and treat their gambling activities like a business to where they can still file as a professional gambler. We have other clients that, may have won substantially more than a lot of our professional gambling clients, but the frequency and the way in which they carry in their gambling activities, they're going to file as an amateur. So I'd first say, make sure you know kind of what the thresholds are to file as a professional, and you can substantiate that. Second, which is pretty close to first, record keeping for sure. Make sure you track everything that you're doing and you're treating it as a business. So what I normally tell people is, go open up a separate bank account, whether it's personally or under an LLC. LLC is usually not necessary for gambling, but it's always something that you can do. Fund your business bank account with your bankroll. That way it's completely separate funds. If the IRS ever questions your business, you can say, hey, look, I have a business credit card. I have a business bank account. Anything related to my gambling activities is going to be in this bucket. And then all my personal activities are in this bucket over here. Then you would also track your time. The one thing that the IRS likes to hang their hat on is that you can't possibly put in enough time to be a professional gambler if you have a day job. So I always like to make the argument, baseball players, football players, they might be only on the field for a couple hours a day playing games or a week, but they're practicing every day. And with gambling, it's similar, whether you're studying but reading books, or if you're on a forum online, or you're taking classes. If you're a poker player, you could be reviewing hand histories. If you're a video blackjack player or video poker player, you could be looking at payout structures, scouting games. There's so much that goes into being a professional gambler that the time element, if you're tracking it, you'll probably realize you're spending a lot more time doing it than you originally thought that you were. And then just from a general, this is more not just related to gambling, but just for a general recommendation. If you're a professional gambler and you keep really good records and you start tracking all of your expenses and all of your winnings and all of your losses, you get a much better idea of just how you're doing. There's a lot of people that are professional gamblers and they think that they might be at a certain level of income, and then they realize that they didn't take into consideration expenses, or there were certain sessions where they lost and they didn't want to track those because it just put them in a bad mentality state. So if you track everything, you have a really good idea of where your profit and loss stands at any point in time.
That's absolutely great advice. That's great advice for any business owner. But yeah, I'd say, what is the time requirement? So you mentioned that there's a really high time requirement that the IRS likes to hang their hat on. What is that rule?
There's no direct guidance. And that's the thing. You kind of just have to present your case if the IRS ever wants to challenge you. So that's why you want to say, hey, look, I might only spend 2 nights a week playing cash games in a casino, or, whatever type of gambling it is you're doing. Or if you're sports betting, you could say, hey, look, I am looking at player stats throughout the week. If I'm poker, I'm reviewing all of my hand histories. I'm in Discord groups. I meet up with friends to discuss strategies.
Mm-hmm.
You really need to lay out all of the things that you do, because agents they're generalists, right? They're not that familiar with gambling. So if you can educate them on all of the things that go into gambling, they usually get a better understanding of just what it takes. And the more things that you can list, the more it proves that, you're taking this seriously and you are a professional.
Very true. Now, let's talk about, you brought this up actually as one of the topics we could discuss, and I'm kind of excited about it, is gambling with crypto. That has got to be ridiculously complicated, because crypto itself is complicated. And I feel like a very interesting concept that we're all new to. And now we're introducing the concept of gambling on top of that. What types of scenarios are you seeing, or what are you starting to uncover when it relates to gambling with crypto?
Yeah, there's a couple things. First, with just crypto, there's a lot of sites out there that kind of get around the regulations by offering cryptocurrency gambling. So you can easily, from no matter where you are, it doesn't matter if you're in the US or outside the US, you can just deposit crypto onto the site. They'll transfer it into USD and you're good to go. So really if they follow that model, it's a little bit easier. It's essentially, I'm going to buy some crypto right now, and that's my cost basis. As soon as I sell it, deposit it onto the site, I have a taxable transaction right there. So I need to track my gain on that portion. Whatever happens in the casino itself or on the online site, that's strictly gambling winnings. So you don't have to worry about any crypto concerns while you're gambling on the site. But then when you withdraw, that becomes your new cost basis. Essentially, you're purchasing, the crypto from the casino. And then whenever you sell, there's a taxable transaction. So usually the issue there is, when am I going to sell? What am I selling? Which portion? And that just gets into the general crypto debate of making sure you have really good records for your cost basis. On top of that, we have new offerings of gambling where you can even go gamble in the metaverse now. So you could go into, you can go into a casino in the metaverse and you can gamble with or without money. So there's a couple of nuanced situations where one of the more popular offerings in the metaverse is you can go play poker and it's free. So you don't have to actually put up any money. However, you need to buy an NFT to get into the casino. So at that point, what becomes your cost basis? What becomes your buy-in? Is it gambling? Is it not gambling? So there's obviously no guidance around that. Kind of have to use your best judgment as to what's going on in that space. Now, granted, it's not as popular as other gambling offerings right now, but it's something that could, grow. And it's something that I have to deal with just because we have people that are doing those types of things.
So if somebody is, I guess it depends if they're recreational or professional, but like if someone has to pay, for example, to get into a room or to get into a tournament or to get into a casino in real life, not just in the metaverse, but like in an actual casino, if they have to pay to be entered into a situation where they could gamble, is that deductible in a sense against the winnings?
Recreational gamblers, no.
Okay.
No expenses related to gambling can be deducted if you're a recreational gambler. If you're a professional gambler, you're self-employed. Same rules apply to if you own a bakery. So if you have to pay a
Ordinary
fee,
and necessary. Yeah.
Yep. If you have to pay a fee to get into casino, if you have bank transfer fees, if you have coaching, if you have travel, any necessary expenses that relate to the business, you can deduct. The one caveat, and again, this is one of the things that makes the IRS makes it difficult for gamblers. Doesn't matter what happens, you cannot generate a loss. So even if you have expenses that are in excess of your net profits, the best you can do is break even and show $0 of net income.
Interesting. So when you say that, you mean that you basically disqualify as a professional if you make no money?
So you can still file as a professional. So let's just say I had $40,000 of gross winnings and $30,000 of losses, giving me a $10,000 profit. If I traveled a ton throughout the year, pretend travel was my only expense, and I had $15,000 of travel expenses, I could only deduct 10,000 of those. The excess 5,000 that would have given me a general business loss and offset against my other income, that goes away, doesn't carry forward, doesn't carry back. It's locked in that taxable year. So
Got it.
prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you could carry forward that loss. But when the new tax law came into play, no longer can do that. So the best you can do, I say best from a gambling perspective, is break even, whether you have more losses than winnings or more expenses than winnings. You can't show any type of loss from gambling activities.
Gotcha. And I guess with gambling, it's so tricky because you mentioned game of chance versus game of skill, right? And fantasy football is hanging in my head where I'm going game of chance or game of skill, because I mean, you're not playing on the field, but you're still kind of taking a chance, but
daily fantasy sports, fantasy football, and poker have largely been lumped into this category of skill arguments. All three of those, you would argue, have an element of skill, but then from playing devil's advocate, you would also argue that there's a very high element of chance to all of those games, whether it's injuries or, just relative percentages when you're playing poker. No matter what, from what I see from the IRS, they're going to consider those games of chance regardless. So
definitely
from a legal standpoint, you can play daily fantasy sports in many states that don't allow gambling, but we can't look at what the courts have legally said is gambling versus game of skill. We have to look at the IRS's definition, and from everything that I've read and understand, it's going to be considered gambling.
Okay. So here's another scenario. go out with your friends and you go on the golf course and you go $100 a hole. It's like a contest, it's whoever wins. Game of skill or game of chance. Is that gambling or is that just, that's a wager, right?
It's still going to be considered gambling, even though
Hmm.
you're playing golf, which now you could get into the argument of, is it gambling income or is it just other income? That's up to you. But most people are going to want that to be gambling income because if they have other gambling losses, they could offset it against it. Whereas if it's just other income from, whatever it is, you're not going to have anything to offset against that if you're just a recreational gambler. So in that sense, the only way that it might actually help you is to be considered gambling income. But normally, if you have some type of peer-to-peer wager, whether it's, just a prop bet or something on a golf course, it's going to just be considered some type of gambling winnings.
Okay. And if you go to, let's say you go somewhere and there's a raffle to raise money, and we'll just say it's not charitable just for the sake of that argument, right? Mm-hmm. So you go somewhere and there's a raffle, and you pay money to buy a raffle ticket. Is that a gambling loss if you don't win?
Yeah. If you're paying money and if it's not a charity event and you're paying money to enter something, it's going to be the same thing as entering into a lottery. It's just a different type of way that it's regulated. So if you would have won, you may have even received a tax form for the raffle itself based on the value of the item. And if you lose, it's something that you can keep track of and deduct against other types of winnings you might have.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think there's a lot of folks probably going, oh, shoot, I've been gambling this whole time. I didn't realize it. Are there any other enlightening scenarios that you can think of, or maybe client examples without using names, of course, that where you've been like, actually, that's gambling, or you may not have realized that, that these are income and expenses related to gambling?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any, only because most of the people that reach out to me already know that they have some type of gambling. So there are some instances where after we get into everything, they'll say, oh, by the way, I play poker on an app that's not tracked by anybody and it's not regulated. It's technically, is it legal or not? Do I have to report it? That's where I come in and say, hey, look, whether or not this is actually considered a legal activity, that's up for debate. Online poker, for the most part, definitely lives in a gray area. You still need to report it as taxable income. So it's more about people who have income that is not going to be regularly reported to the IRS, and they have questions about if they need to report it versus what I'm doing here. Is it actually gambling income?
And let's talk about enforcement of that too, because, in reality, I go, of course, yes, you report all your income, but I go, well, what is the IRS going to do to find that? Like, how could they know about your, family wager of whatever, you know what I mean? So there's a whole lot of that nuance there of, at what point do you report absolutely everything? It's super confusing because I feel like it can be so cumbersome to remember all these different rules.
Absolutely. And are there people out there that are not reporting their gambling winnings and losses? I can guarantee you that there are. I think that most recreational gamblers, whether it's sports betting or just going to the casino a few times a year, they just say, hey, look, I ended up losing money at the end of the night, so I'm not even going to report anything. I can't tell you how many times online in just random forums or tweets or whatever it is, people talking about openly that they're not reporting money that is not reported to the IRS below the necessary thresholds. So obviously it's my job to make sure that I tell you that every type of income that you have is reported. But that being said, there might be people who have safe deposit boxes or there's just cash. It's the same as doing work for a cash business. You can only rely on the profit and loss statements that they give you if you're not doing their books. So you have to just inform them about the laws and the guidelines and try to get them to follow as best they can. And then hopefully they understand everything that needs to be reported. The one thing that I do tell people, and it goes back to the session method, is it does not matter how much money is reported to the IRS on a W-2G or any tax forms. If you are tracking all of your sessions via the session method, we can report your sessions. Even if it says you have $200,000 of jackpots, if you only have $100,000 of winning sessions, we can report the $100,000 number. So that goes back to the importance of tracking all of your sessions because it's only going to help you in the end. A lot of these people, whether they're playing, let's just say high limit slot machines or whatever it is, you might have $25,000 of W-2Gs in one session, but you lost $10,000. So you can save yourself your adjusted gross income by tracking it via the session method and potentially save yourself a premium tax credit or a number of deductions where you'd phase out over a certain AGI.
Okay. Very interesting. Zach, thank you so much for shedding light on this. There's definitely way more nuance to, gambling winnings as taxable income than the simple, report. Oh yeah, I report what I go on at the casino. So I hope that everyone took away something valuable from this in terms of what they're doing and how it could actually affect them. How can folks find out more about your firm and get in touch with you if they would like to work with you?
Yeah, you can go to the website. It's zakthecpa.com. You could also find me on Twitter at zakthecpa. And really just, if you have any questions, definitely encourage you to reach out. I talk to people who don't end up being clients all the time. Really, the goal is to just kind of make people aware of the implications of gambling tax. And there's surprisingly a lot of conflicting information out there, whether it's are gambling winnings subject to a flat tax rate, or I don't need to report certain winnings. So really, if there's any type of doubt, I always recommend people reach out just to make sure that they're on the right path, especially because everything is so dependent on the facts and circumstances of each case. Just kind of getting a second opinion never hurt anybody.
Totally agree. If you guys took away anything from today's episode and learned something new, please, please, please tag me on Instagram. Let us know at Keep What You Earn and at Shannon K. Weinstein on Instagram. Share this episode to your stories and let me and Zach know that you took away something from today and learned something new. Zach, thank you so much for jumping on the show today and spending time with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to explore more about the topics discussed in today's episode? Or maybe you have specific questions on how to apply what you learned? If so, check out the Keep What You Earn community. Join other listeners, entrepreneurs, and experts, and get the support you need to get out of overwhelm and into action. Click on the link in the show notes to join now for free and start maximizing the value you get from each and every episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your podcast platform. This small action goes a long way for podcasters to get our message heard by more business owners just like you. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to information about our guests and ways to get in touch with me. We'll see you on the next episode.